connected with, Michael, we're recording this, okay?
Good. This is good.
We're contributing it to the Library of Congress and the National Endowment for the Arts, and who knows. Anyway, I ended up, a kind of opening occurred in the room, a room in Fernald, with one of my new friends, because of course in those days, in the first couple of months in your freshman year, everyone's a new friend.
Everyone.
Right. I mean, I realized in some cases people had longtime friends in college with them, which was really nice. But for me, everybody was totally new. And but anyway, so I ended up moving to Fernald. Those were the good old days.
Yeah, they named it Carmen because nobody would give a large contribution to name it after themselves because it was such an ugly thing. And so they named it after Harry Carman, who was a greatly beloved dean. But it was kind of he was a second choice by far.
Right.
I liked the cinder blocks in Carmen,
Yeah.
where I stayed for 4 years. I thought the rooms were large and the bathroom facilities were ideal. Why move to, excuse the expression, Fernald or Hartley or Livingston?
You know, it was great.
Schermerhorn. I wouldn't have minded living in Schermerhorn.
Yeah, but they didn't have dorms there then. My room was on the second floor, which meant that 3 feet from my door was the balcony looking out on the lobby, which was a lot of fun. We could just hang out there, see your friends coming and going, people would gather. And the window, in this tiny room, looked out on that little quadrangle going up to journalism.
Mm-hmm. Did you see watching the Jefferson statue, was it?
Exactly, yeah.
My son lived in Fernald his last year.
Right. Was it Thomas Jefferson, the president of the United States, the Virginia racist?
It's a complicated world, and as a matter of fact, after your lecture, it's going to get even more complicated.
Well, I'm going to throw some curves. No, I'm not.
Good.
Michael will serve as umpire.
Where are you guys sitting right now, if I may ask?
I'm
in a
sitting
chair
in Park Slope, where I've lived for 50 years in this house.
Right. Wow.
And this is you see a small part of the study.
Your study, right.
Behind me is my office and part of my bookshelves. I'm not actually there at the moment, but it promotes some of my books and those of my mentors.
Right.
So I'm wearing my Columbia College reunion neck strap too.
Oh my gosh. So where are you actually sitting, Daniel?
At home. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go have dinner while listening to your talk. Michael, are you going to do the introductions?
Okay, I'll do a little bit of an introduction.
Okay, good, because I have this Cordon Clos du Roi 2008 and a roasted chicken. And I can hear the sounds of Esther busily.
We'll be right over.
Half of it. So
what year is the chicken?
The chicken is a fledgling.
A fledgling, okay.
Literally.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. So I think we're beginning. Well, are we?
We should admit people as soon as they log in.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
I haven't seen anyone else asking for
I
it.
agree.
But I'm going to go stop my video.
Okay.
And mute and listen.
Okay.
But we hope you'll speak up.
I have to do that tomorrow night because I have to give a 45-minute talk plus answers. And it's even more bizarre. I also have a presentation tomorrow about 2 or 3 hours before that in another Columbia meeting, which has nothing to do with our reunion.
Really?
Yeah, so it's a scary time for me.
And tomorrow I will be joining you from Saratoga Springs, where we rented a house for a week or so beginning tomorrow, just to get away.
Well, that'll be fun.
Yep. So you'll see a very different background tomorrow night.
Right.
Yeah, I stayed in Carmen for a couple of years, and then Jean left, and I got an apartment at 120th and Broadway.
Right.
Oh, excuse me, 120th in Amsterdam, where the big drugstore was.
Oh, yeah.
We were on the first floor in the back with a very high ceiling in a very small apartment. And we figured out that the apartment would have been 1.3 times as large on its side. The ceilings were that high.
How funny. Wow.
They were servants' quarters for the fancy apartments further up the line.
Right.
But we had a good time there. It was a good apartment, and we didn't have to deal with elevators. You know, we were right there on
Right.
the first floor.
Right.
Uh,
Michael, have you walked over to the whatever they call it, the new northern campus above
Yes,
125th?
yes. Yes, I have. It's at some length, number of times.
Yeah.
It's still it's going to be half campus and half construction site for the next 20 years
Yeah. Right. Right.
to fill it all out. But the Zuckerman Mind Brain Behavior Institute and the Arts Center and the International Conference Center are really impressive buildings, well thought out, and they are very much being used. And the business school, which consists of 2 buildings and a little park between them, is well underway. It's behind schedule, but you know, who cares? But it is well underway. It should be done fairly soon.
Right.
It's kind of a mystery as to which building will go next, will be put up next. And a lot of it, of course, depends on great big naming grants. So we'll see soon about that.
We need to ask Elizabeth II to do something in memory of her ancestor, George II, who started the whole thing.
Yes.
You remember, how many alumni now do you think know what the original name of our college was?
A lot. I think that's one of the few things they do know.
Really? I hope so, but
They don't know any of the college songs except Roar Lion Roar. They have no idea of traditions other than they know the Corps has been here for a long time.
right.
It used to be that we had a small number of student activities, and they all went back a number of years. And if a new one was formed, it was a big deal.
Right.
Now there are hundreds of little tiny activities that come and go after a couple of years. And the college just sort of lets the students run them. They don't really have anything to do with them. So the traditions are lost. The Glee Club, which used to have 80 members for 80 years, now has about 12 people, and it's really no different than an a cappella group. And has nothing, I've tried to revive the traditions there from time to time, and it's like talking to the wall.
Really? Did you sing it in it when you were in?
Yeah, I ran the Glee Club and the a cappella group, the Notes and Keys,
Right.
back in the day.
Wow. I sang in the chapel choir in those days,
Oh,
which was great, actually.
yeah.
Wow.
Hello, Neil. You're muted, Neil.
Unmute.
Mute. Neil, you're muted.
There you
you
are.
go.
Hello, Neil. I'm stepping it away for 10 seconds. Excuse me.
Please. Hello, Neil.
Hello, Michael.
What does the red hat say? I can't see
Sorry,
what does your red hat say?
San Francisco Giants,
Oh, okay.
who up until last Friday were in first place, but then got swept by the Los Angeles Dodgers Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Okay. Okay. As long as it wasn't a Trump hat, you know,
Hello again. One thing I don't think we've talked about, and it's not the topic of tonight's discussion, but for some reason it occurs to me, and that is that I was only a little bit aware of this when in my undergraduate years, but I think we were the only Ivy League college in the 60s in which, after freshman year anyway, you were highly likely to have women in your class because for two reasons. One, a number of classes were shared with Barnard, and the other that they were shared with general studies, which was, had men and women, which was I thought a kind of great thing about the experience, because so I look back at many of my classes and most of them had women. They might not have been a majority of the students, but it made some difference.
The code in the catalog was courses that began with a W. The W was not for women, however. It meant it was shared by the different schools. So if your course began with a C, it was college students only.
Right.
But if it began with a W, then you could have Barnard or engineering students.
Right.
Don't ask me why
That's
I
right,
remember
engineering
that.
too.
Right, don't ask me why I remember this 55 years later, but I do. I think it's because I'm an academic.
Well.
I liked it that you could go to a professor who was teaching an interesting course in the graduate schools and convince them that you could take the course. I was an English major, and I took a semester of Finnegan's Wake with William York Tyndall, the great
Wow.
Joyce scholar. And that was marvelous. I was the only undergraduate. And it was amazing to hear these people who were way above me in understanding and studying literature to take apart Joyce's language and all the references that he made to so many things. So that was a real treat.
Very nice. Huh.
Has anybody published an annotated Finnegan's Wake? I would destroy the fun.
Yes,
And it must be 3 or 4 times the size of the
Yes.
work itself.
It's something called the Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake. It's not an annotated version, it's an accompaniment to Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah, I know about that, yes.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, looks like we're at about 8:05. We can get started here. Thank you so much for joining our reunion event, The Arts Scene Before, During, and After the Pandemic. I'm going to hand it over to you, Randy, and you can launch into your talk.
All right, I will. We have a small group so far. We're expecting more to join us, right?
Yes.
No. Okay. Well, I don't feel highly qualified to talk about this, but I don't know who would be qualified to talk about it because it's so much in the process of evolving, God knows. But, and needless to say, a fair amount of it has been picked up by the press because it relates to a general sense of vitality and economic prosperity and potential and so forth for the city. But the I think it'd be safe to say that anyone who went to Columbia as an undergraduate was well aware of and appreciated the fact that that person was going to school in the cultural capital of the nation and arguably of the world. In my case, I was especially lucky starting in September of '62 when we arrived for freshman year. My older sister, who had come to New York a year before to study music, she and her boyfriend, soon to be husband, had gotten jobs ushering at the then brand new Philharmonic Hall, the first building opened at Lincoln Center. And she said, come on down, you know, Lenny, as in Leonard Bernstein, does a pretty good job conducting. And so I would go down. They had a nice little system for illegally allowing me to sit in a seat in the hall. And so I went to virtually every weekly performance of the New York Philharmonic in freshman year and sophomore year and so forth, which was quite an amazing experience because it resonated with lots of things that we were talking about and reading and so forth in classrooms and in our dorms and so forth. One of the, well, pre-pandemic cultural life in New York City, meaning up to, 18, 22 months ago, was unbelievably rich and prosperous and active and engaging in many ways. And virtually every art form was very, very actively participated in, both in the sense of artists making work, organizations, or commercial enterprises like the Broadway theaters presenting work, and sellout audiences in many, many, many cases. So this whole world of cultural activity was, like everything else in America and in the world, immediately terribly threatened by the shutdown of the pandemic. And almost everything came to a halt, except for things which were virtual. But what that really meant was, and now we get into the mid-pandemic picture, it meant that institutions like museums and opera companies and dance companies and theater companies and so forth were forced to find ways to communicate with an audience virtually. And on the other side, the audiences, desperate to have that experience, were extremely happy to find that they could at least have a virtual version of it. And so to a great extent, the cultural life of New York and of the country, and even of the world, but I'm focusing primarily on New York and the country, continued, even though most of the artists were not being paid. The cultural institutions were immediately faced with extremely serious financial challenges, posing questions about bankruptcy and so forth. And the commercial part of it, the art galleries and the Broadway theaters, and everything to do with the film business, which is more hidden in New York, but still a huge part of New York, New York's cultural and economic life. All incredibly serious challenges, needless to say. I'm not saying anything that is new. What is encouraging, and I've been very pleased to witness and have a little bit of involvement with in a few small areas, is that these creative people, artists, and the arts administrators and patrons and others who work with the artists and try and help the artists bring their work to the public, have been as creative as they need to be and as we would hope them to be. And so, and again, I'm not saying something that you're not aware of, I'm sure, but so what's happened is not just that traditional things, museum exhibitions, regular performances of theater, dance, music, and so forth, have been made available virtually. But to me, one of the most interesting things about this period is that this group of creative people has been forced to, encouraged to, and enabled to invent new ways of presenting their work, conceiving and presenting their work. I'm going to give one little example of which I would suggest you all take a look at. There are hundreds of examples. I couldn't list them all, but one that I'm have a connection to just through friendship and especially aware of, which seems to me one of the most interesting examples of tradition-bound cultural program, organization, entity, which has been amazingly inventive in this period, is a program called Works and Process at the Guggenheim. You may know this program. It's been around for 20 years. It was started by a friend of mine, Mary Cronson, and her idea, probably 25 years ago. Her idea, the original idea was, okay, Brooklyn Academy of Music, Met Museum, New York City Opera, Met Opera, it's more performing arts, of course, or American Ballet Theater, New York City Ballet, and all those, have commissioned a new work. And people who are following this closely are well aware of it and looking forward to it. But in the normal course of things, you had to wait till opening night when the curtain goes up. And her idea was to, and this is the program that's been developed over, as I say, 25 years or so at the Guggenheim, almost always occurring in their nice little Frank Lloyd Wright auditorium. You get the creative person or people behind the work on the stage after some performers who are going to do the premiere of the new work have given an excerpt or two for a live audience, and then the discussion led by a critic or some other knowledgeable person with the creative person. And so the people in the audience, and this is filmed, of course, so it's made more available to a larger audience, those people are able to get some real understanding of what inspired and what is in the minds of the creative people making this new work. So as this small program found itself in the midst, like all the rest of us, of the pandemic, they became as creative as the artists that they had been presenting for years. And they created a series of what they called bubble development programs. They found places, one called Kutzbahn Dance Center, which is outside of Tivoli, New York, about 80 miles north up the river. And they gave safe housing for small groups of artists who could then work in very, very contained and safe and sanitized spaces, develop new work, and then they built an outdoor stage in their big meadow and invited an audience to come, out in the open air and watch it. But it was to me, what's interesting about it is not just that it was made, these works were made in these very difficult circumstances, but they were made for presentation on video streaming. That was understood to be the main way in which they would be experienced. And so what we see is, in that case, primarily dance, but also music and theater, being, to a certain extent, reinvented because of the pandemic. And everyone who's involved in this and who's watching this and paying attention to this, and critics who've written about it in the Times and elsewhere, have said, we're seeing some new energy and some new creative ideas on our screens, since that's the way most of us experience it. And that suggests some promising possibilities for the future of the arts in New York, in America, and the world, and so forth. So to me, that's one of the most interesting aspects of this, the negative impact of the pandemic turning into a surprisingly positive result. Anyway, I could talk at length. You've read about it in the paper all the time, no doubt, that big institutions are in terror of going bankrupt. There is a big division. The museums can and have opened their doors. And so you can go into the Met, the Whitney, the Modern, and so forth, and see art exhibits. The crowd numbers are carefully controlled, but you're not alone. And they are, there's a sense that they are the beginning of recovering their livelihood, their economic reality, and so forth. The performing arts are far more challenged because they have to have, except for these little things taking place in a meadow, they have to have an audience sitting in an auditorium. And that's still extremely, extremely challenging. And so, people are saying, isn't it nice that the Met Museum is reopened? And I'm terrified to think, to wonder whether the Met Opera will survive. And no one knows yet. My guess is that those big performing arts institutions, all the ones at Lincoln Center and Brooklyn Academy of Music and so forth, and all around the country and the world, that they will survive, but they will be hurt for a generation. It'll take them a generation to recover economically and audience following and so forth. So that's a kind of general view that I have of this whole picture. I'd be happy to hear what any of you think about it.
Well, can I make a statement, which is that the most serious way I've been affected by the pandemic has been, for me, the loss of live music.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, I still have my work, of course. My kids are fine. Things go well. I don't mind wearing a mask when necessary, but we used to go to between 35 and 50 concerts a year. And we, of course, can't do that anymore. And I'm suffering from withdrawal symptoms from the music. We used to go to house concerts near Columbia that a colleague would organize. And I very much miss those. You said something which I think resonates with me, that creative people can't help being creative. Performers can't help performing. Composers can't help composing. And of course, what they can't have is what makes it economically feasible, which is an audience. I've given donations in various contexts for this, and that's helpful, but not very helpful. And I can only hope that with mass vaccination, that we return to something resembling normal in a short time.
Well, of course, I agree with you.
Yeah, Carnegie Hall is the closest thing I have to a cathedral or synagogue.
or second home.
It is a second home, and in fact, we run into Dan all the time at Carnegie.
Carnegie.
Same number of syllables.
That's because we're always there.
And it's just awful. I have been donating as well because I'm not paying for the tickets and I'm not paying for the dinners before or after the concerts.
Right.
So it's actually, there's a fair amount of money that can be used for donation. Also, Roundabout was a big part of our lives
Mhm.
for 30, 40 years.
Mhm.
And usually seven performances a year. And that's Roundabout Theater is coming back, but they're suffering terribly. And they have a lot of real estate. They have 4 stages.
I think what you're talking about is yesterday and still to a large extent today, but tomorrow, very shortly, in the mountains up here, our Deer Valley Music Festival featuring esteemed musician Bob Gerland is going to have 50% capacity on the hill.
Yeah.
Now, there are still many of us, including myself and my wife, who have what I referred to yesterday to a friend as COVID anxiety. So there are so many unknowns, even though we're both vaccinated, underlying conditions and other things. There's so many unknowns that there is this amongst some portion of the population, COVID anxiety.
Of course.
But nevertheless, when you're outside, there's music and it's summertime,
Yeah.
and the little kids running around the hill, and you're enjoying that particular Utah Symphony event, which is one of the foremost symphonies in the world. I'm sure you all are aware of it. Well, it's featuring Bob Gerland, of course.
Neil, excuse me, where are you again? What mountains are you in?
In fact, it would be interesting if people would put up their names, and but mine's the only one that's not in New York.
But where are you now? Excuse me.
Park City, Utah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Wish I were there.
That's changing, but
Yeah.
as Deanie said yesterday in his remarks, nothing's going to be the same as going forward tomorrow as it was yesterday.
Right.
So these venues featuring Bob Gerland will also, besides being at a street corner in Lower Manhattan, will also be, many of them will be available via Zoom.
Well, the 50% capacity in your festival is about right, because Bob is down to about 50% capacity these days.
But I mean, think about it historically.
Unmute yourself, Bob.
Music has, for most of human history, music has been played out in the open air. And that can be done now and is being done now. And we've got electrical equipment to amplify the sound. So, I go up in the summer to Saratoga Springs.
There he is.
SPAC, the Saratoga Performing Arts Center.
Yeah, I see.
And the theater has no walls, so it doesn't have acoustics like Carnegie Hall, but it's still a lot of fun.
So Randy, how many companies went out of business, filed for bankruptcy? New York.
No one is keeping a careful record that I have come across. Not very many yet. It's still a threat more than a terrible reality. And people are gaining a little hope. What they're doing, what businesses do. They lay off temporarily or not a lot of the wage earning employees. So the disaster is being felt by the employees as much or more than the organization. And the hope is that if audiences, and therefore income can, and an activity can resume and an income can return, that financial stability can be achieved. Again, as I said earlier, I think it's going to take quite a long time for big institutions like the Met Opera or even Carnegie Hall, we were talking about before, but to come back to a healthy situation. All of Lincoln Center is threatened. I know the director of the New York City Ballet, and she says, we just say a prayer every morning when we go to go to work virtually, because they are so uncertain about their financial future. One of the problems is that they're relating to this topic. There are two aspects which are uniquely American. One is positive and the other is negative. The positive is that this society, despite all of its quirks and eccentricities and diversities and all that, has proven to be, for a few hundred years, very receptive to cultural expression, cultural activity, and so forth. Organizations are created, artists are able to reach audiences, and so forth. However, we never figured out a very smart or dependable system for supporting the whole thing. In France, for example, there's no question who pays the bills at the Paris Opera. 100% are paid by the federal government, the national government. It's considered an extremely important part of their national life, educational, cultural, and social life. We have exactly the opposite. The city that I am still a citizen of, and some of you are a little bit near, perhaps. The New York City is the largest government cultural funder in America, larger than the national government, which is a positive thing about New York City and an extremely negative thing about the United States of America. They depend on rich people giving. And they're, sure, it's nice to get their money, and it gets spent on good things, one hopes, but it's not a good system. It's not dependable. And it's fundamentally anti-democratic. Small d. Now, I should say, and I probably should have mentioned this in my first set of remarks, that I am very pleased to see that there have been suggestions for increased government arts funding from the mayor of New York, the governor of New York, and the president. It's not enough. It's not enough to save the whole situation and to change the climate and crisis we're in, but it's a very, very positive, important gesture and beginning of support. And it's, to me, a little surprising, but in a very positive and nice way. But, all your taxes, your tax money.
My impression is, and I think it's ironic, that a large fraction of the populace is resistant to public funding of the arts because they consider the arts an elitist institution, and that they're funding, things for people with money already or people with taste that they wouldn't approve of. And yet, I mean, really, the arts is anything but an elitist institution.
It's 8:30.
Opposite of that.
Right. Yep. Well, if you ask them, do they think the Dance Theater of Harlem is elitist? They may have to stop and think a moment.
Well, not if they're outside New York. Not if they're in the countryside. And that's
even there. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well,
I should say, I'm in Cleveland, where we have a world-class orchestra and world-class art museum. And my impression is both are doing pretty well. we also have something called the Cleveland Fund, which was Rockefeller, old-time Rockefeller money. And although Cleveland is one of the, I think it's the third most impoverished city in the country, there are a lot of people with a lot of money in the suburbs still. And so the orchestra's fundraising campaigns have been successful. And my understanding is the art museum is in pretty good shape too. But I'm not sure that's sustainable long-term in a city that's now about 400,000 inside compared to New York.
Well, you have a great museum and a great orchestra. I'm sure you have.
Can I offer a note of optimism?
Please.
In the last 5 minutes, I just got an email from the Chicago Lyric, which I go to whenever possible, announcing a season
Good.
for
Oh,
next
wow.
year. And if our meeting of the Society for Neuroscience in Chicago in November is actually live, I'm going to go hear the Magic Flute
Oh,
in the Civic Opera House, which I love.
Well, my wife is a nut for the Magic Flute, and we go to the Lyric on a very occasion because we have kids in the Chicago area. Can I share a reminiscence? Is that appropriate?
Yes.
Please. Please do.
So I actually
Alumni gathering.
yeah, I owe Columbia a lot, idiosyncratically, because I love classical music. We're fairly regular tenors with the orchestra. And although I've never played anything, I'm a New York City boy. I grew up with, I was exposed, middle class upbringing, exposed to New York City culture from an early age. Never thought much about it, including when I was at Columbia, because I always assumed I'd live in New York for the rest of my life. And it was just part of the environment. And I was brought up with a small set of records in the house. My parents were not musical, but they subscribed to something called the Music Treasures of the World. And there were probably a dozen or 15 or maybe 20 classical music records that I listened to as a child and liked, and then somehow in high school just forgot about them. And, I had no particular interest in classical music by the time I got to Columbia. And when I took the second year music appreciation course, which was given by a guy named Howard Shannon, who was taught very well. Nevertheless, I went into the final exam with a straight F in the course because I couldn't read music. I couldn't make out the themes and repeat them. I couldn't do anything. And I wasn't used to failing things, but I really was failing music. Somehow, and actually by dint of having drunk, had a lot to drink and stayed up all night the night before my last two final exams, I almost failed my math exam, in which I was a very good math student, and I aced the music exam because I had a photographic memory for music on that one afternoon. But in any event, something I heard in that music course, if you remember Ferris Booth Hall, you remember the big music rooms in Ferris Booth Hall, and in particular the one that had this large window looking out on the campus and low library. People remember that?
Most of them in the basement, remember?
Well, I think WKCR was in the basement, but I think
WKCR was on the second floor.
That's right.
And
You're
some
right.
of the music rooms were in the basement with no windows.
Yeah, in the main lounge, you had a grand piano. And then on the second floor, you had large practice rooms and music rooms on the second floor front.
I think that what I remember are a series
was the Board of Managers office, 208 Ferris Booth Hall.
You're of course correct. What I do remember is that there were several moderate or small size music rooms in this one large hall.
Yeah.
And something I heard in the music course just took me, caught my ear, and it took me up there one day and I went into that huge room. And I should say, I grew up in apartments. So you could play music, but you couldn't play even, the walls were pretty good. You couldn't play music loud. And something I had heard, motivated me to go up there and reserve that large room and put on whatever it was, loud and just at night and sort of conduct to it, looking out towards Low Library. And whatever it was, it just got my interest in classical music going. And I started listening more, and I've been again, I don't play anything. I'm not terribly educated, but I actually know a lot of classical music now, and I've loved it for the rest of my life. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. If you think about it, there aren't many places where you could simply at that time go and listen to great music on great stereos as loud as you wanted to, with a beautiful view, and just get into it. And that particular experience just did a lot for me.
May I also say something about Howard Shannon, who you mentioned?
Mhm.
Howard, who was the conductor of the Columbia University Orchestra, also wrote a history of the New York Philharmonic and a very famous paperback book called How to Read Music. Howard, who died, 10 or 12 years ago, was a very good friend of mine and my wife's.
Very interesting. Nice. The one of the things that I like to think back on, back to our years in the 60s, was our connection to pop music and other popular culture, and other popular things. I had my freshman English course was taught by a guy named Kenneth Koch, K-O-C-H. I learned a couple of years later that Kenneth Koch was part of the New York School of Poets with Allen Ginsberg and everybody else. I mean, he was kind of the next generation, but they liked him and they included him.
J. Kenneth Koch.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Anyway, but and it was, you know, it was interesting it is interesting to remember back to how, even though we were a little bit cloistered at 116th Street, we nevertheless encountered live culture in different ways from time to time, accidentally and unpredictably and so forth. But I remember going into the kind of cafe that existed in the basement of John Jay Hall. I have not the slightest memory of what it was called. But you went down a half flight of stairs and you could get, you know, kind of a bite to eat for lunch. And I went down sometime in my freshman or sophomore year with a friend, and he said, pointing to a table with the two guys were sitting at, and he said, "See those guys over there? They were like juniors then." He said, "They just got a record contract." And I said, "Wow, cool, how nice." He said, "Yeah, Simon and Garfunkel." And, you know, so we were as cloistered as we tried to be, or as at least as our administrators tried to keep us. We kept encountering the cultural life of the city and of the world, which of course was pretty nice.
My wife and I spent much of our 50th reunion with Tony Starace, who unfortunately is one of the people we've lost in the last few years. And he and I were in school together from 7th grade.
Really?
Yeah. And I hadn't seen him in 25 years, and you know, but I really miss him. We had a very good time 5 years ago. How we spent a lot of time was when we went to Broadway shows.
Of course.
We got the Broadway show and did everything.
Did you learn
He's
how to
in
second act?
Nebraska. Pardon me?
I'm sorry. Did you learn how to second act it?
How to second act it? I'm sorry. Couldn't quite hear you.
Second.
Oh, did we learn how to?
You sneak in after the intermission.
Second acting at Carnegie Hall was a tradition for some of us.
Exactly.
Yes.
But I have a story for you. This is from my childhood. I'm half Canadian, and my Canadian relatives who had the money in the family would periodically come to New York and expect to be entertained. And my parents would really go way out of their way to entertain them. So it made for exciting times. And there was one time when they came down at relatively short notice, and I don't remember which play it was, so much of my time. But anyway, there was a huge hit play that had opened fairly recently, and my dad really wanted to get some tickets. And so there were, some of you who were still there will know, but there were two major ticket brokers in New York with very, very similar names. And so my dad went to one of them, or called one of them, or whatever. And he said, you know, my secretary reserved these tickets and so on. I'm here to pay for them, pick them up, whatever. I think he went downtown too. And of course he'd never done that, and there were no such tickets. And they said, you know, well, we don't know who you are, Mr. Emery, and so on. Your secretary must have screwed up. And they had this long thing. And my dad, who was an engineer for New York and ultimately ran the water supply system in the Bronx, you know, negotiated fleets and negotiated people a lot. And so he just, you know, eventually after some series of exchanges, you know, he said, I know what it is. I always do business with you guys, but you know, there's this other agency with a name like yours, and my secretary's new, and she must have gotten it mixed up, and the tickets must be in the other place. And I'm terribly sorry. I'll go over there and pick them up. And they immediately produced like 8 tickets for whatever the show was, and so he told that story, and I've told that story ever since.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
all right, I'll tell since we're talking stage stories, a fun story. I was doing a PDQ Bach concert at then Avery Fisher, which I guess now is Geffen Hall, whatever. But I had been asked to do a theme and variation. Well, so I was asked to do a performance, and my roommate or apartment mate wrote the piece, and it was a theme and variation for piano and vocal trumpet. A week before the show, the networks are doing, well, what's happening in New York next week? And they interviewed me and said, oh, I understand you there. And this was ABC and NBC and CBS, and the cameras were there. So they said, is this an old piece, or is this something, you know, newly put together for the show, or is this a, you know, classical piece? And I said, no, it's not a classical. It's just, you know, something we put together for the show, and went on. Now, I made a crucial mistake. What I should have done, since Leslie, the person who wrote it, was right next, I should have said, oh, it's written by my piano player, Leslie. I won't even mention her last name because of what ended up happening. Anyway, so camera stops. Boyfriend is furious, and he said, why didn't you give her credit? You know, she wrote the piece. And I said, oh my God, I hadn't even thought, whatever. So I went and I bought a dozen long stem red roses, which I had never bought a dozen long stem red roses before. And I went to her house. The boyfriend said, you shouldn't even show up tomorrow or next week. So I went to the house and I said, Leslie, please, this is Lincoln Center. You know, you got to show up. So Saturday afternoon, so she said, okay, we do a dress rehearsal. She's there. We go through the piece, break for dinner, come back. It's an 8 o'clock show. 5 to 8, no Leslie. 8 o'clock, no Leslie. Now it's after 8. I was slated to go on at about 8:15. And the MC, Anna Russell, an English comedian, had come backstage and said, Robert, what should I say? Where's your piano player? And there's a little peephole in Avery Fisher. You can look in the back and you can see, and my parents were there. You know, you could see in the audience, my parents are there, my 97-year-old grandfather, my cousins from Europe who had come in and so forth. Everybody was there. So I just announced, I said, just announce it regularly. And I walked, so she makes the announcements, ladies and gentlemen, Leslie Pearl and Robert Curler and Bob Curler will be playing theme and variation. Well, the longest walk that I have ever had to do is in the middle of Avery Fisher Hall. There's a Steinway Grand or Bosendorfer or whatever, probably a Steinway, and a microphone in the middle of the stage. That's it. Walk, go up, pick up the mic and say, well, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, my piano accompanist is not with me this evening. And you hear this kind of groan in the audience. Because, you know, when you always get some piano player to fit in at the last minute, right? Nobody. So I did the whole thing a cappella. I actually got a standing ovation, which I was very impressed with. And next day I call the house and the boyfriend answers. And I said, Jim, I thought, what happened to Leslie? She's supposed to be at the at Avery Fisher Hall last night. What happened? He's kind of quiet. He said, well, I said, is she okay? Because I thought maybe she got hit by a bus or something. He said, no, she's all right. I said, well, come on. Is there some kind of message? He said, well, I guess you got the message.
Oh.
So it's kind of like, oh,
Wow.
it was like, okay. So one message was, of course, give credit to the people you're performing with. But like, a year later, actually, I was turning a car in Los Angeles, and the person who had just turned the car in before was Leslie, and it had her name and phone number, but I didn't really want to call. But I realized at the end of the day, what she was looking probably to do was to put me in my place for being an unsympathetic Nimrod, not giving credit, and really, have it be terrible for me. But actually, it was the best gift that I could have ever got, because when you can walk into the middle of the stage of Avery Fisher Hall and pull it off, I was never afraid of the stage again in my life.
That's
And
great.
I realized it was a gift I would have never thought, but it was such a wonderful moment. So-
Robert, I was hoping that you would tell us that this would somehow meld with Anna Russell's either Wagner or her Practical Banana promotion, which she was famous for. And I would have liked to have a recording of that.
Well, I'll just say that was one of the records that I grew up with, was Anna Russell's Ring.
Yeah.
And what's the other one? The other one on the other side of the record was How to Write Your Own Gilbert and Sullivan Opera. And so I'm honored to know somebody who's been introduced by Anna Russell. That is still, both are still hilarious.
It's our generation,
I have a Columbia Philharmonic Hall story. In my freshman year, I was new to the Glee Club, and we were the first choral organization to sing at Philharmonic Hall.
Wow.
Now, when Philharmonic Hall opened, it had the same acoustics as the Grand Canyon. You couldn't hear a thing.
It's
So-
not much better now.
Well, a little.
Little.
At least the thing about it then was we got on the stage and we warmed up and we started singing, and no one could hear each other.
Oh,
All of
God.
the sound went out, nothing came back. So we had no blend.
Amazing.
So we ultimately sang almost in a circle. So we could get some kind of a blend, but it was a surreal experience. They recorded the concert, and the recording was geometrically better than the performance. They had enough microphones in enough places so that it worked out fairly well. But that was a terrifying moment. I thought the conductor, Bailey Harvey, was going to just leap to his death. He was so disturbed. Everyone,
Sound like they positioned those ceiling panels almost randomly. When they
Yeah.
first-
Oh, yeah.
randomly would have been better.
So, Michael, you performed down there at Philharmonic Hall, but my sense was that our classmates didn't go anywhere. That they didn't go to museums. They didn't go to, of course, some of them had to, and I remember an art class that made me go to the Frick, but for the most part, we went to the West End, and right, and
Old
very few people went down.
Not all of us.
Old rail.
I mean,
Old Rail.
student pass at
Old Rail was
Philharmonic Hall then was $1.75. Undergraduates could have. but-
Well, I very early in my freshman year, I met Stefan Rudnicki, one of the great characters in the class. who made still makes his living doing voiceovers and audiobooks. He had this magnificent voice. And he loved opera, and he introduced me to opera. And we would go to the old Met before Lincoln Center.
39th Street.
Yeah, and he would talk our way in. He had this amazing voice and presence. So we spent a lot of time there.
That's great.
Not so much in the museums, but we did do music.
I had a elderly aunt, my father's aunt, who lived in the Bronx, and she loved opera. She was a spinster. She loved opera, and she would let me know that it was time to go to the opera Sunday afternoon kind of performances. So I actually had the privilege of attending the old Met many times, you know, in the sort of the cheap seats, or even sometimes standing room only, with my old aunt, who loved opera. Which operas, you know, they all conflate over 55 years.
Yeah.
But it was a remarkable New York City experience. And then we would also go to Greenwich Village, to the jazz clubs and things like that, with some degree of frequency, because you could get in with a little bit of money and not have to spend any money there. And it was the time of vast amount of new creative experiences.
And Neil,
Went a few times, not too many. We went to Broadway productions when other Rellies would come into New York and host us for some sort of fancy dinner and a Broadway show.
Yeah,
Fast forward 35 or 45 years or something like that. You know, the Columbia kids today get a cheap pass to a lot of cultural events. It's part of the curriculum, so to speak.
well, maybe next year.
yeah, the Gate and the Vanguard were amazing in those days. George Shearing and Dave Brubeck and Ahmed Jabal and so many marvelous, Nina Simone. They were all there, and they were 3 feet from you. It was very intimate.
Too much smoking.
But you guys remember one important thing: drinking age 18.
Yes,
You could go to a jazz club.
and have a drink.
We have to. That's a political thing we have to work on.
What is it now?
24 or 31 or something.
At a
Like 40. You have to be 40 years
for the
old.
freshman class to inculcate them to the local brew. I think that's
Exactly.
what picture.
Exactly. Did you guys ever go down to McSorley's when you were,
Oh, yes.
right? I went there all the time.
Yes, after exams was the time to go to McSorley.
Exactly.
No women.
What? No, but after
I
exams,
said no women.
you were in
Right,
no
no
shape
women.
for women. I wasn't anyway.
The Times did an article back in those days saying that, you know, amazingly, it was a single family from what, 1854 or something like that, that had owned it. And the current owner, generation, fifth generation, was a woman. And understanding that their policy was not to admit women, she never showed up during opening hours. She would go at 10 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, and the manager would open the cash register and give her all the cash, and she would walk out.
Didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, the onions and the cheese and the ale, it was
Video.
great stuff.
Sure.
In
I
fact,
was there not that long ago.
James Bruce Rosenberg was with us on a couple of those occasions.
And we made fun of the NYU kids.
Yes,
A
well,
little.
that
A little.
goes without saying.
Now, also speaking of McSorley's, if I'm not mistaken, and if other people remember, behind the bar Does anybody else remember what was behind the bar?
Edmund Shorelands?
Yeah.
Ancient stuff.
No, I remember there was a huge cow penis,
Oh, yes, yes, there was.
I don't remember
Yeah.
that.
which was a big deal. No
Yeah,
pun intended.
No pun intended, yes.
But I remember when I was in high school, that was like, oh my God, did you see that? You know, this is like, what? You gotta be kidding. And sure it was. And this thing was like 3 feet long or something. I mean, whatever. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
definitely a cultural event.
Surely it was a
Remember
bull
that.
and not a cow.
Yeah.
Okay, bull.
Yeah, a bull's pizzle, as Shakespeare once said.
Well, I'm sure that Danny can tell us about bull.
No, everything I say is true and deep down. As a matter of fact, tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock, I'm going to give a talk, and Kai Lee is going to give a talk, and I can assure you they're both going to be fun and informative.
I'm sure.
So if you have survived tonight, tune in tomorrow night at 8. It will
What's your
be
topic?
what my topic is the brain, and Kai's topic is the planet.
Oh my
And for
God.
those of you who heard my talk 5 years ago, and of course memorized it word for word, this one is completely different. Just as much fun. And Kai, who for some reason never comes to our reunions, has decided to come to this one because I told him it would be fun and important for him to do so. He served on all sorts of government and intergovernmental committees on sustainability and the planet.
Wow.
As for me, I'm just your ordinary neuroscientist.
Oh my God.
And Linda was saying earlier that she actually remembered your talk from 5 years ago.
Really?
Great. Well, this one's going to be different, but I think it's going to be fun.
So she will probably join us, particularly because you're doing it, and you were so memorable 5 years ago. And Kai Lee was on the board of Yosemite National Institutes, of which Linda was chair of for 8 years. So there was a double hitter there.
That's great.
Yes, I went to high school with Kai. He was my freshman roommate. We were both physics majors, and we both subtly used our physics background to move on to other things. He to environmental sustainability, and me to neuroscience and biophysics and the brain and all sorts of other good things.
Was Kai a math student his first year?
I'm sorry?
Was Kai a math student his first year?
We were all math students our first year. And
I,
having been exposed to algebraic topology in its most serious form, that was the point where I switched to being a physics major. But
yeah,
I took algebraic topology with Samuel Eisenberg,
Yeah.
I think, as did Kai. And
Okay.
we took math classes with Spill before he decamped to Berkeley. And it was a stunning experience, but it wasn't for me. I am a neuroscientist because as a physics teacher, I was required to take a science course. I said, what do you mean a science course? I have 40 points in physics and 18 points of chemistry and whatever. And my advisor said, no course may be used to fulfill 2 requirements. You have to take a science course. So I took biology, and I said, well, this is what I want to do. That's how I became a biophysicist and a card-carrying member of the Biophysics Society.
I remember I had Polycarp Kush for physics for
Physics
poets.
for poets, yes.
I had Polycarp too.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
The courses for poets were great. And in fact, tomorrow night, I'm going to give you a little bit of brain science for poets, and then end with a poem for brain science. So that's a promissory note.
Yeah, I had Kingsley Fairbridge for geology, which was
That's a piece of work.
Wonderful course.
That's a piece of work.
Yeah,
Wow.
remember him? Yeah.
I'm gonna miss you tomorrow, Danny. I got my softball game. Sorry.
This is better than softball.
Well, Neil, I see you're getting dressed for it.
I'm sitting in your old building, my friend Randy,
Which one?
610 West 115th Street.
You are not.
I am. I came back
Wow.
here after my divorce in 2009.
Shit. Really? The same building?
Same building and the same apartment.
No.
Oh my God. I was at 604 West 115th for probably 25 years. Then I let Loudon Wainwright, Loudon took over the apartment, and he wrote Rufus as a tit man for his new infant son, Rufus Wainwright, in that apartment at 604 West 115th.
Still
As-
exists.
Yep, as Rufus was suckling. That's the right word.
Neil, we have to talk.
Yeah.
You know, I found out something I didn't know when I did this book, Time to Stir, with Paul Cronin about 68, which is, you know, Mark Rudd used to hang around the building because his girlfriend was here. And because I had Linda Ronstadt and some other people visiting and attractive women around, Rudd came to me and asked me about how to do sex. This is before 68, of course. And so it's amazing to me when the whole thing started with 68 and there's Mark Rudd leading a goddamn revolution, and the kid is basically the same guy who came to the apartment and used to sit with me and drink McKellen's and you know, get tutored on how to do some sex stuff with his girlfriend in the building. That's where his girlfriend lived.
I love
And we would have at the bottom of Ferris Booth Hall and New Hall, Mark Rudd, we would have all these political discussions.
Wow.
Yep.
So Mark Rudd, during the revolution, whatever we called it, gave a speech standing on the sundial, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
Oswald. And I was there, paying careful attention and you know, being very much with him. And at a certain point, I didn't even remember exactly what this was related to, but he said, and you know the Rockefellers are behind this, you can bank on it. Wait a minute. He doesn't understand the language he's using. He's a fucking commie. Oh, well.
Classmates, I have to beg off at this moment, but I'll rejoin you tomorrow.
We'll say hello to Utah.
Oh, and by the way, if you're still there, Neil, I've got land between Monticello and Blanding in Utah. If you're ever down south near below Moab.
We were just at Escalante and Capitol Reef a couple of weeks.
Oh, so beautiful, so beautiful.
So
Are you
beautiful.
selling it, Robert?
We love to ski out there.
Wow.
I really miss one. I want to get back to, when I live long enough to get back to Alt.
I've been still waiting for you and your charming, lovely lady to show up at the door.
I'm
Well,
waiting for a
we're gonna-
Greenland National Park.
What?
What?
You heard me. A
No, I didn't.
Greenland National Park. You
The
could donate
Garland-
your land to the
Yeah,
federal government. It could be established as Greenland National Park. Gaby could put on one of those cute Smokey the Bear hats.
Yeah.
Well, we'd have to have something that has good echo, so I could, really have good sound.
Uh-huh. We
But-
get it.
There are some caves and beneath some of the arches.
Well, we're just below Arches National Park.
Yeah.
It's beautiful out there.
Okay, this is the point where I think we have
Yeah.
said everything we want to say tonight. And we should tune in tomorrow night for
Right.
some serious but fun stuff. And there is going to be, in addition, next week, an evening devoted to schmoozing for
Yeah.
members of the class of 66. My colleague, Mr. Garrett, will inform us of this right now.
Yes, yes, it is bring all your stories and true or not. And it should be a good evening. But before that, we have next week after the Memorial Day weekend, we have Cal Johnson talking about his service in Vietnam. He was an infantryman and he was wounded, and it could have been any of us. And it's amazing to hear him tell this story. So I recommend that highly. And then we have Ira Katz-Nelson, our classmate and who's acted as the provost during this insane pandemic time. And he's, for the first time, going to be talking about his experiences.
That'd be great.
So that should be great. You may remember he spoke to us about being a professor 20 years ago and now and 20 in the future at the 50th reunion, in fact, at Bob Gerland's patio.
Yep.
And
One of his many patios.
yes, I don't know what, is that the correct plural? I'm not sure.
Patios? Oh, that's fascinating. Yes. Well, I should say Bob and Gaby, you know, I have to learn
Right,
to
that's
be
right.
joint
Are you
here.
trying to learn from the Leslie Pearl experience?
Gaby just said, are you learning
See,
from,
how they
you can
they
hear-
heard me.
I don't know. This is
I heard someone else there.
Mark Levine is doing the Chicago 7 on Thursday, May 27th at 6.
Yeah.
I don't see the schmooze. When is that?
Friday night.
That's the last evening. After-
Friday, the 28th?
2 weeks for you.
No, after the weekend. After
Oh.
the weekend.
Next
So
week.
Friday, June 4th?
No.
Yeah, or the third. I think it's the third or the fourth.
Well, the 3rd is Thursday, so Friday is the 4th?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's Friday.
Right.
Okay.
But
What time?
tomorrow night at 8, we have the Science Plus Entertainment. Okay, in case you want to know how you work today, how your brain works, and what your future is tomorrow.
What time is the Friday, June 4th event, Mike?
It's all in your email. You have all the
No, it's
emails.
not. I
What?
have a printout. It's not. I have a printout in front of me. It's not.
You need a better one. Tomorrow night is at 8.
Neil, you
I know that's tomorrow night. I'm asking about June 4th, the schmooze.
Neil, you got an email 2 days ago from
2
the
days ago?
college.
No, I didn't
It
get it.
has
I don't get your
absolutely
emails.
everything in it.
I'm not getting your emails, Mike. Okay.
No, they're not
Okay.
my emails. From the
I'm
college.
not getting it. All right, I'm not getting it. Okay.
Okay.
I have it in my calendar as 8 p.m., but that could
Thank
be.
you.
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's
8
correct.
PM on the 4th. Okay, thank you.
Neil, it came from registration.
So
Okay,
I guess that's it, guys.
okay. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'm
Motion.
deeply moved to adjourn.
See you all tomorrow.
Okay. Good
Great
night,
to hear you
gentlemen.
all again. Good
Roar
night.
line, roar.
Okay. Good
Good
night,
night.
Gaby.
Good night.
Bye-bye.